Hello and welcome back. We start with lecture 5 today, and with this lecture we will be completing the first module, which is our first week's discussion. So, today we will look at cultural theory of language evolution. So far we have looked at various aspects of language evolution, primarily from the biological standpoint in terms of what are the biological underpinnings and how they are studied in terms of analogous and homologous structures across species and so on and so forth. And we also looked at various debates within that. So, now we will move on to cultural theory of evolution. Now, cultural theory of evolution is not exactly a new thing. Language has been considered as part of cultural aspects of any given species, any given groups of humans since a very long time. And we have already seen how during the time of colonization, during the time when the Europeans went and discovered various new worlds, so to say, that at that time there was a discussion about how the primitive people became civilized people and what are those important criterion on the basis of which people can become from a savage, so, quote unquote savage population to a human society, what are those important factors, and language was considered one of them. So, language was important in terms of civilizing people, as a result of which it is part of the cultural tradition of any community, along with art and literature, music and so on. Literature of course, is a much later development, but art and music go hand in hand with language. So, that was how the old ideas have been around. In the 19th century also, Humboldt and other scholars have talked about the same thing, that languages should be having a status similar to art and music. So, during this time, it was also the time of the beginning of philology as a discipline. So, it was considered as a cultural and historical phenomenon. Why historical? Because in terms of historical linguistics and cultural understanding of language during those days, it was already well known that languages have changed, language have split, language have converged and diverged through various kinds of processes, and new languages have come into being and older languages have changed as well. So, all this process was explained using a tree structure with branches emerging through human contact, convergence and divergence. So, thus philology of that time contributed a great deal in understanding evolution and change of language through ages. Now, this was 19th century, but of late the same ideas, same theories have gotten more strengthened in the recent time, and it has emerged as a counter of some sort or let us say complementary standpoint with respect to the biological understanding of language evolution. Now, there are certain differences within biological and cultural aspects of language evolution. The main perspective among the non-evolutionary position that we have already seen, those proponents, those scholars who do not believe that language actually evolved. It was believed to be suddenly, it appeared suddenly out because of some kind of a mutation. So, that standpoint typically takes a perspective that language is somehow spatial and it cannot be connected with cultural aspects. Language has a different modality. In fact, that is where the modularity of the brain and the language specific areas and so on, all those ideas come from. So, it is not connected to, or it is not part of any other cultural aspect of humans. That is the idea. And as a result, there is no reasonable expectation that general laws of cultural evolution would apply in a uniform way across language and other contrastive domains like religion, technology, group organization, so on and so forth. So, this is where the primary juxtaposition is all about, because the cultural evolution theory puts language along with other kinds of cultural evolution, be it the evolution of religion, evolution of technology, evolution of group organization, social structure, all of these things. So, according to Dept and others, other scholars of in the cultural tradition, this position is based on a few misconceptions that about the notion of language itself and about the language, how language functions in a society. So, they go on to discuss these misconceptions in detail. Due to brevity of time, we will simply mention some of them, but the references are of course added, you can look up. So, some of them are language is biologically fixed. So, this is one of the primary areas where the misunderstanding, or let us say lack of understanding always occurs. So, this is only biologically fixed, but the cultural theory says that though we do not really deny that language needs certain kinds of biological underpinnings. However, ability to speak, these are important for ability to speak, but these are not special for language. We have already seen how many of those structures that that was considered to be unique to humans were also found to be present in many other species. In fact, some of them go back to all the way to the initial stages of evolution of animal species itself. So, these are not special for language, that is one area. Then comes the language idea that language changes constantly. Now, language of course changes, that is a well known factor, but then even there is not a uniform phenomenon. Certain aspects of language changes faster than certain other aspects. Some aspects of language are far more deeper and less prone to changes, that is another. Similarly, all humans have equal command over language. The idea of the ideal native speaker is the idea here, that all humans will have similar kind of competence, native speakers will have similar kind of competence, but this may or may not be true, entirely true. For example, I quote, language acquisition continues through the active adult years, right, as new rhetorical skills and new social arenas are mastered. For example, certain complex terms like the acquisition of the triangular kin terms. So, basically the point here is that we keep learning language throughout our adult life. Of course, there is a certain time frame within which the primary ideas or primary structure should be in place, which is the famous critical period hypothesis, but that does not stop us from learning language all through our life, because we come across newer understanding, newer rhetoric, as well as newer social realities, and the language keeps on changing through all of that. So, one particular example that I have added here is a very complex kin system, kin terms in a particular language that Evans has talked about. Now, these kind of complex structures the community needs more time, in well into their 20s they keep learning. So, this idea also has been is also not entirely tenable. All languages are equally complex. Now, this idea was generated in a way to counter the Eurocentrism, because again the idea was that European languages are superior, European race is superior, all the colonial due to the colonial period. So, as a result of which this idea was proposed that all languages are equally complex. However, latest findings point towards a possibility that some languages do have differences in terms of structural complexity. Not all languages have similar kind of structural complexities. That is also a new finding. And it was also believed that complexity of language is inversely proportionate to technological development. So, the more technologically developed a society is, the more simplified the language will be, the more homogeneous the language will be, the more structurally easy to identify and understand the language will be. These two has been countered, and one of the main counterpoint that has been proposed is that you need sophisticated measures of complexity. To understand what we mean by complexity, we need more sophisticated measures, and hence it may or may not always hold true. So, on the basis of this kind of differences and points of departure, let us now come to what exactly is cultural evolution of language, what do they basically say. Now, on the one hand, biological investigation focuses on aspects of language at individual level, for example, all the biological underpinnings, vocal tract, brain, etc. Cultural studies on the other hand look at interaction and learning as main points. So, human as a part of a society, as a part of a whole, a part of a cog in the machine sort of an understanding, and as a result of which learning and interaction takes center stage in the cultural theory of evolution. as opposed to the strictly biological underpinnings. Now, cultural evolution is generally understood to be important for a variety of animals, not specifically for humans, and as a result it indicates a very deep evolutionary root. There are various important studies, I have quoted one here, that show that cultural evolution is actually a constantly ongoing thing across various species. So, using cultural accounts of language evolution often depend on computational modeling, psycholinguistic experiments, psychological experiments and linguistic data. But a large amount of work actually has been done using modeling, computational modeling, agent based modeling, simulation and so on and so forth. But to some extent the theories also use developmental and comparative data. So, cultural interaction and learning bias are the most important things that have been studied through modeling, of course. And so, we will see we will look at them one by one. Learning bias is one of the most crucial aspects of cultural theory of language evolution, as put forward by a number of researchers. One of the most important name in this regard is that of Kirby, Simon Kirby. We will look at his contribution shortly. But first let us find out what learnability or learning bias means. Now, in order to survive, a language must be learnable and useful. Something that is very difficult to learn will not be learnt and passed on. That is the basic idea here. So, if a system, if a structure is easy to master, if a structure is easy to learn, then it will evolve, it will spread, it will be transferred and so on. So, for example, learning in the simple rule of plural is better than the rote learning of all the plural forms in English language. Now, English language has irregular forms and regular forms. Suppose imagine if all the plural forms were irregular, each going their own way, it will be very difficult to learn. Hence, here because the majority of the words follow the rule, hence it is easy. So, this is a very simple example of learnability. What learnability means, because there is a rule, it is easy to learn, and because there is a rule, it is also useful for using the same rule on the new words that can be coined. For example, words like blog, vlog, selfie, these are new words. Now, we do not really need to sit down and figure out how this should be pluralized, because there is a rule in place which you simply use selfie, selfies, blog, blogs and so on and so forth. So, aspects of language which are easy to learn and process and which have communicative utility will be stamped in and amplified over successive generations of language use, while linguistic patterns which are awkward to learn or process or which have little value to language users will be stamped out, is how Christensen has pointed it out in 2010 paper, which is very influential paper. Thus, a lot depends on the learner themselves. So, the person who is learning is a very important agent in the entire system. So, as a result it depends on him or her. So, the bias towards learnability is what is important here. So, language evolves and adapts to the selective pressure imposed by the learners. A successful language should also be useful in that it should be able to convey multiple meanings in the speakers want to convey. It is very of course, it is kind of redundant to say that language, even the same structure of the language, same sentence can be utilized in multiple ways. That is a telltale sign of a very complex language system. So, we know something can be used as a simple statement, it can be also used in a sarcastic way, it can be used in a metaphorical way and so on and so forth. So, to do all of these you need a structure where you do not have to spend lot of your mental energy to just to figure out the structure, that is the idea. The rule governed structure thus helps in easy learning, expressibility and transfer of the skill through generations. That is how you can summarize this idea. Now, evidence for these accounts comes from agent based modeling and more traditional psychological experiments, particularly in the artificial language learning. So, this is where Simon Kirby comes in. Of course, there are many more scholars here, but again because we have to this is not a detailed course on evolution. So, we will stick to two main scholars, Simon Kirby and Daniel Everett. Simon Kirby is a professor, artist and DJ. Now, what he says is that language evolution can be understood as a complex interaction between individual learning, cultural transmission and biological evolution in human population. So, it is a dynamic process. It is not a one single strand of genetics that makes everything possible, but it is the coming together of biological aspects, cultural as well as individual learning biases. That is the idea. He bases his theory on modeling and simulation, primarily modeling and simulation based on usability, interaction and so on. And he bases his ideas, he bases his theories on previous studies carried out by a number of scholars who looked at evolution of cultural practices and linguistic practices, namely De Boer and Herford. So, he agrees that language, at least in part, is a learned behavior. It may not be entirely learned, but at least some part of it is learned. So, differences and variations in languages have no obvious correlation with genetic differences in their system, because languages are different. We all know there are as many groups, as many languages are there, but genetically speaking that kind of differences are not possible. So, hence these variations must be aspect of learned part of the cultural system. That is how he puts it. And so, there are two things that come out of his theory, one is structure and the other is iterated learning. Structure, by structure we mean here that learners create a structure in an apparently unstructured system, in this case language system. So, that is what he tries to show through his simulation experiments. So, language is unique because of iterated learning. What does iterated learning mean? It means that one person learns from another, who in turn learns from another. So, it is some kind of a chain that goes through. It is not something that some sort of a Chinese whisper game. So, we learn from our other people around us, and similarly we pass it on to our next generation, other people who come in contact and so on. So, we inherit language through two important pathways. So, to say first is mechanism to learn genetically, and then language themselves, which is learned culturally. So, there are very a lot of different types of experiments. One of them is naming game. It is very interesting and quite a commonly utilized structure in this domain. So, what happens here is that this examines the role of interaction in language evolution. Naming game focuses on a population of interacting artificial agents who are tasked with labeling a particular meaning. So, the meaning is given and the label has to be given. So, agents begin by generating random strings for meaning, and initially communicative success is very low, because different agents are giving different names to it. Over a period of time, they call it generations of artificial agents, it is very easy to check this in artificial agent, because checking generations of humans will be a very time consuming affair. So, what they see is through generations of artificial agents, there seems to be some sort of a convergence on the some sort of an agreement on the terms to be utilized for the same meaning. So, initially there is no communication possible, because they do not agree, but over a period of time they seem to converge on a particular level for a particular meaning, and as a result of this they discard all the previous labels, and this leads to high communicative success over time. So, this is in a nutshell what the game does. This simple bias allows agents to converge on a shared conventional level for a meaning, as a result of which it can be carried forward in the next generation. So, that is naming game. The iterated learning model is another social learning perspective, which focuses on coordination in learning instead of interaction. Language learners do not receive a disembodied input, rather they learn from the output of other language users. So, in the iterative learning model, it begins with agents learning a subset of initially random vocabulary, initially it is random. A subset of output of this particular generation then becomes the input for the next generation. Since agents receive only a subset of the input, but are tested in the entire vocabulary, they generalize patterns to unseen items. So, as through generation the list of random words are passed on, and then the next generation is tested on the entire vocabulary, they impose some sort of a structure to it. That is what the model talks about, right. So, just because we know that blog becomes blogs, selfie becomes selfies, and similarly, so if you know half of it, you use the same idea, same structure on the rest of the vocabulary. Now, this has been utilized on human agents as well, both human agents as well as primates. So, with human agents, participants were tasked with learning initially random pairing of nonsense words and meanings. Both the meaning and the word are nonsensical, they do not exist in the real world, and that is why they were used, and their output was transmitted as the learning input for the next participant, much like the artificial agents. Results showed that initially random languages become structured over a period of time. Now, how do the structure emerge? That is very interesting. So, it in line of it highlights the role of cultural transmission in finding out how the mapping really happens over generations. So, over a period of time they find out some sort of a structure in the meaning. You can see this is what was utilized in terms of meaning, and these are the words. So, this is just a small subset of the entire experiment. So, there is no such things like this. So, over a period of time what the human agents were found to be doing is they used some sort of an understanding of similarity of the structure, be it in terms of the number of angles it has, or whether it is filled or it is dotted or fully colored or whatever, and accordingly some sort of a structure also begins to appear in the linguistic labeling of it. So, that is what they have found with respect to human agent. The most important aspect as a result of this experiment is that initially this entire set has no structure, but eventually they get some sort of a structure starts to emerge. So, language gets structured through cultural evolution, because here we are talking about one set of speakers to giving this their output being used as a input for the another. So, there is a chain of transmission, and that is how structure eventually emerges. That is the finding. The same study has been done on primates as well, but in case of primates, of course, you cannot use complex things. So, they have used something like this. There was the study on baboon they had used random patterns on a grid with 16 cells, somewhat like this, and same kind of model. So, one baboon learns this, and it was used as the output of the baboon, one was used as an input for the another, and eventually they start creating some sort of a structure even within that. So, they exhibit structure, specifically they resemble the tetrominoes, the shape from the classic game Tetris, which involve 4 consecutive field cells. So, this is how it happens even in the primates, and that is why this finding is very interesting, because this is found in the primates, this is found in human agents as well as artificial agents. So, this has to be tenable to some extent. Then there is idea of interacting time scales. So, the biological and cultural perspectives are often thought of as something as alternative or in clashing with each other and so on. However, the new idea that is emerging is that they are there are different time scales and they interact with each other in some sort of a this kind of a structure is what Kirby talks about. This is how. So, the genetic structure is genetic aspect of it is a long drawn affair, right. It happens, the genetic underpinning happens through generations. On the other hand, language requires some cultural input and development, as evidenced by certain kinds of cases of language of deprived children, and the existence of culture radically changes the way biological evolution works in our species. So, strong innate universals are unlikely. We have already seen that, we talked about the lactose tolerance thing, how culture shapes the way your genetic structure will eventually turn out to be. Of course, it is a long drawn affair. So, any biological underpinning necessarily evolves in a relatively slow genetic time scale. Cultural or glossogenetic time scale is on the other hand slightly shorter. It evolves, new words emerge and others die within few years, and then the individual time scale is another, which represents language development, while human children are undoubtedly primed to learn language biologically. Then linguistic input becomes the brings in the cultural realm. So, in all these 3 realms interact with each other, and as a result of which language changes, evolves and passes on. That is the finding from Kirby and his associates. On the other hand, we have Daniel Everett, who is also a proponent of cultural evolution theory of language. So, he starts one of his books like in the beginning there was word, and then he says no, it was not. So, the primary idea behind Everett's theories, Everett is an anthropological linguist, and most of his theories are based on his decades of work on Piraha language in the Amazon. So, he says that language emerged as an instrumental product of certain cognitive capacities of the human brain to meet some of the requirements of being the kind of social animal that humans are. So, basically the kind of social life that you have, the cognitive necessities of conducting yourself in the world, these are the deciding factors into what kind of language will emerge and what kind of language will not emerge. So, for strengthening mental skills like thinking, reasoning, mathematics, symbolic logic, so on and so forth, these are the. So, here the idea is that language is not only a tool for communication, but it is also a tool for creating the overall cognition as we know. So, language is he calls it a cultural tool, a tool for shaping the way members of human communities behave, think and know. So, that is what is cognition all about. So, Everett entirely rejects the idea that language is innate and says that there is a combination of human capacities that make human language possible. So, these combination of capacities it divides into physical, cerebral and the cognitive, and he also calls them platforms. So, each platform is made up of a set of what he agrees the basic capacities or capabilities specific to humans, but not to language. So, humans have this the basic physical abilities, which is in terms of the biological, then the cerebral and then of course, the cognitive. So, all of them converge, all these platforms. Briefly, the physical platform is the body of course. So, all of them converge to create language as a tool. So, as a result he focuses on the learned aspect of language as a skill and not on the inherited one. And then because of the environment in which you find yourself and other factors, language is he stresses on the cultural aspects. So, here he gives of course, he gives many examples primarily from Piraha, but also other languages and how culture affects language. The gamut runs from vocabulary to idioms to grammatical structures, categories, syntactic constructions and what have you. Okay, so, his main theory is that language and culture are inseparable and hence it would have helped in the development of each other. So, language culture co-evolution is what he is a proponent of. Another theory, again this is also not a simplistic one, but again due to brevity of time we will not be able to do in detail. This is called the vocal theory. So, vocal theory, so we had biological theory, cultural theory, now we have vocal theory. Vocal theory is actually though sometimes it is proposed in juxtaposition to gesture theory, sometimes it is understood to be as complementing the gesture theory, and similarly vocal theory has been understood as part of the biological theory and so on and so forth. So, even though we are discussing them separately, they have a lot of give and take between among themselves. So, this theory says that primarily it says that human language developed from simple vocalization such as found among other animals. So, the vocalization as a result of emotional certain kinds of emotional necessity, whether it is fear or it is some sort of excitement or something. So, vocalization that you see in other animals, this is how it started with humans as well, that is the basic idea. So, even though it started with emotion being the driving factor, as things changed, as the vocal theory evolved, now the emotion aspect is not taken as a central aspect, but as one of the factors, if not the central factor. Now, the focus has moved to the articulatory innovations like the complex phonemic repertoire, the nature of the syllable structure, vocal learning, descent of the human larynx, so on and so forth. So, all the way back in 1922, Jespersen claimed that our ancestors sang out their feelings long before they were able to speak their thoughts. So, this is how we trace the origin or the history of the vocal theory. In the recent past, Fitch has referred to music as an example of bare phonology. So, connecting between the music and the spoken language has also happened. Brown is another person, another scholar in this domain, who puts emphasis on phylogenetic basis of cognitive structure rather than the Darwinian issues of adaptiveness and selection mechanisms. So, theories are basically based on two standpoints: language as a mode of communication, that is dialogic view, where dialogic view of language evolution talks about the focus on social interaction, where you would have to interact with other people in the society, as a result of which language evolves in a particular way. On the other hand, language as a cognitive tool, which we are just looking at with respect to Everett, that it is a tool for thought. So, now if we consider the dialogic view, vocal prosody forms an integral part of it. So, vocal prosody is at the root of language, spoken language, as well as it is also an important part of music. So, that is where the vocal theory draws a parallel between spoken language as well as music, taking prosody as the starting point. Emotional meaning, according to the rules of expression, is also attached to it. So, basically it starts, the prosody is the basic idea. In fact, sometimes you do not even need to speak the entire sentence, prosody does the work for you. So, one example that many scholars have talked about is like using just the word be with an exclamatory tone. So, if you just say be in that exclamatory tone, you are actually warning the other person that there is a be, you better be careful. So, as a result of which this vocal theory takes prosody very seriously, that prosody is the most important thing, and on the basis of which structure is imposed. So, prosody is the first thing, and then by virtue of the prosody involved here, it is a complete sentence. So, as a result of which the emotional semantics is portrayed as important in this theory. So, the idea here is that of prosodic scaffold, the model that has been proposed and carried forward by Brown and many others. This model in which overall communicative, whether it is intentional, emotional or other meaning, is the primary factor being conveyed in speech, and in which the combinatorial and compositional mechanism of speech's words and utterances act to fill out a prosodic scaffold. So, as I was saying that the prosodic structure makes the skeleton of it, and on top of that we add the other things. So, that is how language evolved. So, this is comprised of the affective prosody and the linguistic prosody. Affective prosody refers to the vocal expression of emotions, and then we have the set of both local and global mechanisms of conveying emphasis like stress, prominence and so on. Brown of course proposes the music language as the joint prosodic precursor to music and language, and he says that only after that, at a later stage, syntax and other things will appear. Right. So, this is how he gives the features, a list of features for his music language system, and I have from his, this is quoted from Brown's 2017 paper, a list of 12 features that he talks about, which binds together music and language. So, music language system he talks about. Recent findings show a surprising parallel between language and bird song. We have already discussed this. So, we will not get into the details. So, it is not like really too far away, and that is why I said that vocal theory has some connection with the biological theory as well as some connection with the gestural theory. So, the parallel between bird song and human language are of course recent findings, and that tends to support the ideas. And even at the level of neurobiological substrate, we have seen this before, that regions in the forebrain controlling vocal production have been identified in humans, as well as 3 independent lineage of songbirds showing convergent specialization. Right. However, in birds that do not sing like chicken and primates that do not have any language like macaques, there is no direct projection connects the vocal motor cortex to the brainstem. So, basically there are certain kinds of converging neurobiological substrate that have been found across species as well. Now, this is in very brief. So far we have discussed the prominent theories of language evolution. Now, at present of course, the positions are not very strict or watertight compartmentalization. At present the theories have gone through a lot of changes in view of the various kinds of findings. So, first of all, current research often do not consider language as a unique anthropoid phenomenon. Instead, it is shown as it is now viewed through the lens of ongoing human evolution and strict adherence to communicative goal. Language adapting to and reflecting different aspects of environment illustrate that linguistic diversification is not simply an accumulation of random changes over time. Similarly, the emergence of multimodal and usage based theories of language evolution has brought in robust new frameworks in terms of correlation and causation models. So, a lot of remember in the beginning of this module we talked about how computational modeling is playing a major role in understanding human evolution as well as language evolution. So, this is what we are talking about. Lots of new models have come up, usage based and multimodal as well. Neural correlate models have added further knowledge to the interconnectedness of language with other aspects of human cognition. Thus, understanding evolution of language is no more an isolated field of study focusing on language only, but an integral part of human evolution of humans, evolution of how human culture evolved, how the technological advancement happened and so on. So, within that bigger scope, now we look at language evolution, not as a strictly separate sort of a understanding, strictly separate kind of a modular understanding. So, this is where we complete our module 1. It was a very brief overview and I hope you will look up the references. I have added adequate references. These are some of the important books to read, followed by other resources. So, in the next week we will start with module 2. Thank you.